Senator Kennedy began his service in the Senate in 1962, taking the seat of his brother John, the third longest serving senator, known, of course, for his soaring words, but also his actions. So let's bring in Bob Shrum. Bob Shrum, of course, was press secretary for Senator Kennedy from 1980 to 1984, but a lifelong friend. Mr. Shrum, I'm sorry for the loss of your friend, but thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. He was a quite extraordinary person. You know, I just listened to that speech in Denver, and I think of how hard he worked to get there, how determined he was to do it. He was in the hospital all day that day, and so we cut the speech in half, and I also had a 30-second version of it ready, and to which his reaction was, "I'm not coming to the Democratic Convention to speak for 30 seconds. And then on the back the next day, he said, "Let's go through the stuff you cut." And he looked at it, he said, "Well, that was all the best stuff." And he laughed. He had an indomitable spirit that really saw him through this illness and made him, I think, probably the greatest senator of the last 100 years.
You mentioned the laugh. I'm thinking about the trademarks, Bob. The laugh, the sound of him coming down the hall. He had a kind of shuffle, as we know, which was the result of the back injury he suffered when he was in the plane crash. Sometimes the dogs with him, right? The
Yes.
Portuguese water dogs. I'm wondering, when he walked into the room of a fierce opponent, and they sat down and listened to him, and he emerged with a consensus, what did he do in that room?
I think he looked very hard for common ground. He tried to find a place where they could agree, and he was willing to make a compromise. If he couldn't get everything he wanted, he would get as much as he could to try to advance the goals. But Diane, if you look at the list, I mean, if you just went down the list from the minimum wage to voting rights to sanctions against apartheid, children's health care, college loans, it goes on and on. I mean, he really accomplished more than many presidents do.
I think we calculated 2,500 pieces of legislation had his name on them.
And 300 became law.
300
That's exactly
became bill.
right. And Bob, this is George Stephanopoulos. My condolences as well. I wish you could, just for a minute, take us inside the relationship that Senator Kennedy had with President Obama. I know they bonded from the moment that Senator Obama came to the Senate, and then there was that electrifying moment in early 2008 when he made that decision to give his endorsement to Obama. What was that about? What was behind the relationship? Why did he decide to take that big step?
I know he decided to take it because he really believed that it was time for generational change. He believed that Barack Obama represented the same kind of hope and inspiration and the possibility of changing the country that his brothers had. I think he had a profound effect with that endorsement. I think it was probably critical to President Obama winning the nomination. And all you had to do was watch him on that inaugural platform last January 20th, smiling and waving, you know, before he had the seizure when he went back inside. And you knew how proud he was to have been part of that whole thing and to have bent history in that way again.
Boy, that is so right. I remember seeing Senator Kennedy in the park by his home. He was out walking Summer and Splash about a week after he had gone out and started his campaigning across the East Coast for then Senator Obama. He was as happy as I had seen him in 10 years.
Well, he was always fabulous on the campaign trail, and he was, you know, and the happiness, the sense of joy carried over through this last year, which was a blessing for him and for his family. I mean, in February, I remember sailing with him, and it was February or March down in Florida, and George, as you know, I'm not a very good athlete, so I'm trying to get on the boat from a dinghy, and I do what you're never supposed to do, which is put my foot on the boat while my other foot's on the dinghy. And I managed to pull myself on the boat, and he just broke up because he said, "You can't do that. You go straight into the water if you do it." So we spent the next 24 hours laughing and telling stories about the Shrum stretch and why I had been made a permanent passenger over 30 years ago when we went sailing.
Bob, I'm curious if you talked with him about his cancer, about its implications, and when was the last time you spoke with him?
No, we didn't. We never talked about the cancer or its implication. I mean, he knew it. I knew it. The last time was he and Vicki called me after the Newsweek cover story he did on healthcare, which I helped him on. That was about a month ago.
Tell us more about that piece. I mean, it seemed like the senator really did want to weigh in on this health care debate one more time, even though he couldn't speak to his colleagues and to the country as he hoped he could have.
Well, he could weigh in, on the phone, and he did. And, Chris Dodd could come by and see him. John Kerry was seeing him, and he was talking to the president. But this was a way for him to set out the whole case and to deal with some of the distortions that were out there, some of the arguments that were out there. I mean, it was the cause of his life, and he fought it all the way to the end of his life. Some people say that his absence in the Senate has prevented it from happening yet. Maybe his absence now will cast a long shadow and actually help make it happen.
Mr. Shrum, thank you so much for talking to us about your friend, the senator.